Good afternoon. This is TTT Live Online. I'm Mahalia Joseph Wharton. We invite you now to join us for the weekly post-cabinet media briefing, which is about to begin at the Diplomatic Center in St. Anne's. We're bringing you live coverage on TTT and Talk City 91.1 FM, as well as on TTT Live Online on Facebook.
Good afternoon, everyone. Members of the media. Good afternoon to our viewing and listening audience. I would like to welcome you to our post-cabinet press conference. The Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, will address us.
Thank you very much, Minister of Communications, Ms. Donna Cox. A very good afternoon to you, members of the media. Good afternoon to the listening and viewing public. Today is a very sad day for those of us in the Caribbean in particular. For the last 72 hours, we in CARICOM have been observing the destruction of one of our CARICOM neighbors by one of the most powerful tropical storms that we've had the opportunity to observe or to report on the records. Hurricane Dorian has been known to us here in the Southern Caribbean as a tropical storm, which initially caught our attention, very quickly passed Trinidad and Tobago without incident, threatened Barbados directly as a tropical storm. I was in Barbados that weekend, and Barbados by Monday was shut down by the threat of this storm, still called a tropical storm, but very quickly, after it threatened St. Lucia and others, it then going to the northwest, became a hurricane and strengthened to a Category 5. By the time it got to the Bahamas, it was a very powerful storm. As you know, our sister CARICOM territory, the Bahamas, is an archipelago of islands, of about 700 islands, ranging all the way from the Florida coast down deep into the Caribbean. The storm struck the northernmost islands, Abaco and Grand Bahama. And the reports from the Bahamas with respect to Abaco and Grand Bahama is, as the Prime Minister of the Bahamas has just described it, as a generational devastation, meaning that it would take a generation to get over what has been experienced in the 72-hour period. Those of you who have been paying attention to the videos on the television, much of northern Bahamas and those two islands has been reduced to a pile of broken rubble, with human beings thanking God for coming out of it alive. And such is the condition in the CARICOM today. Throughout, I have been in touch with the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, and the CARICOM leaders have been in touch through the CARICOM Secretariat. It took a long time for the storm to clear the area before we could even see the extent of the damage. And you would have been informed by the international media as to the loss of life and the potential for other losses. Question is, how do we in Trinidad and Tobago, as a major CARICOM partner, respond to a CARICOM neighbor that is experiencing what they are experiencing in the Bahamas? We could have done nothing about the storm. The storm has come and gone. The devastation is left behind. The Cabinet met today in its normal meeting, and one of the issues we discussed was how do we do what we normally do as a people in the region, expressing our heartfelt concerns for people who are devastated in this way, and willing to show our compassion and do whatever we can to bring some modicum of relief and expression of that care to the people of the Bahamas. We know that we are ourselves exposed to natural hazards of one kind or another. And of course, we must do what we are able to, even if we have, in these moments, to deprive ourselves of something that we may otherwise have consumed. Today, the Cabinet took the following decisions. One, after conversations with the government, the Prime Minister of Bahamas, the best that they think we could do for them at this point in time is to provide them with some of the disciplined and trained manpower that they would need to make sure that there's law and order and whatever that kind of manpower can contribute to the continued governance of the territory. And we have agreed, along with our colleagues in Jamaica, who are a little ahead of us on this because they're closer, we have agreed to take all necessary steps. The Minister of National Security has been instructed to work with the Chief of Defense Staff and make available to the government of Bahamas for their direction and use immediately 100 persons from our defense force. And that is to be done as quickly as the logistics would permit. And all the details surrounding that would further come to you from the Minister of National Security, who will keep you advised along the way. As I speak to you now, the CDS and his team are working on putting that in place. One of the things that the Bahamas have lost completely and will lose for quite some time is the whole question of electrical power and the need to reinstall that power on these islands. And given our own circumstance and our skills base, we have agreed to make available to the Bahamas a number starting with about 7 technical people from TNTech to go to the Bahamas and work with the Bahamas government and agencies on the subject of restoration of power. We may increase that number as the circumstances become better known to us. The one thing we don't want to do is to rush into this devastated area, meaning well, but of course, becoming a problem ourselves. So we are talking to the government and would supply what we can supply that the government can use to bring about the kind of relief that they think they want to bring about to the population there. And that is why we have specifically ended up with these 2 offerings, which the Prime Minister tells me they can use immediately and would be very grateful to have. And on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, we'll make our citizens, our trained citizens, of that ilk available to the Bahamian people immediately. Bahamas is receiving considerable assistance from the United States and I presume Canada. There are vessels offshore from larger navies that are standing by as soon as the circumstances permit to allow those vessels to go in. The airports are destroyed, so air transportation is not available. So basically we are aiming to get in there as quickly as we could and to be there for a little while providing assistance. So we will support our crew from TNTech and we'll support our 100 persons from the Defense Force in the Bahamas working with the JDF and under the direction of the government of Bahamas. Additionally, the Cabinet has agreed to make available to the government of Bahamas $500,000 to pay for some of the expenses that they will have to pay for now, not the least of which is medical supplies. So those are the 3 things that we are offering immediately. And the CARICOM, about 3 or 4 of my colleagues from the Northern Caribbean are traveling or have gone to Bahamas to work alongside the Bahamas government and to make our presence felt in a way internationally to ensure that the Bahamas gets noticed and get the kind of international assistance that they deserve at this point in time. So that's the Bahamian issue, which is still unfolding, and we trust that our prayers can be answered, that the number of dead and injured would be minimized I think the figure now we're looking at is 20 dead and a number of injuries. Fortunately, New Providence was not hit by the storm, so the capital, Nassau, has not been damaged in any significant way, and the government is operating out of its normal capital arrangements in New Providence. Had that been struck by that storm, it would have been a completely different state of affairs in the nation of Bahamas. So we are grateful for that. And Trinidad and Tobago will continue to be in touch with the government of the Bahamas and to remain with our CARICOM colleagues alongside the government of Bahamas as we try to bring some kind of comfort and relief and resources to the people of the Bahamas from the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The other issue I want to comment on today, and I hope it doesn't distract us from what I've just said, because the real issue we're facing here now is the whole question of natural hazards, which we are exposed to all the time, whether it's volcanoes in St. Vincent and Dominica, tropical storm, earthquakes in Trinidad and Tobago. We're all exposed to it, and from time to time we never know when our turn will come. So we should focus on that and keep the people of the Bahamas in the forefront. But it would be remiss of me if I do not comment on the conversation that is taking place, which seemed to have generated a lot of interest from my political opponents and from persons who are in search of an issue to latch on to. And I speak here specifically about this issue of the Sedition Act. Frankly, I have no difficulty with people expressing themselves on anything I have said or done, but usually I feel better if when people ascribe things to me that they are accurate in what I've said when you ascribe it. But of course, having ascribed it, you can then comment on it in any way you wish. And I did make 2 comments on the issue of the Sedition Act last week when I spoke at is it last week? On Saturday, when I spoke at the police thing. And when I saw it reported, the nuances of the reportage caused quite a bit of disquiet, I would say. And it also caused a lot of generation of political interest in the pathway of those who are looking for a path. Let me just remind you of exactly what I said in the 2 things I said. One, and I'm quoting here from a paragraph of the reporting on the Sunday Guardian. Firstly, I said, the biggest conversation in Trinidad and Tobago today is how old the Sedition Act is, and it's time to get rid of it. Well, if that is how we approach it, we might as well go the whole basket. Meaning that we don't approach a law simply because it is old. There must be other ways of dealing with it, and there must be another basis, because we can't just talk about a law being old. And the reason why I said that is because at that time on that day, the issue was that this was an old law that had no place in our books. In fact, one press conferencee, if there's such a person holding a press conference, actually gave us the date of the 13th century where this law originated. And as a result of naming that date, it's an old law that should be off our books. No, that is not logical, because most of the laws that we accept to be governed by have their origin way back, some centuries. There are 3,000-year-old laws that were accepted in civilization, that are the principle and the tenet of those laws are on our books. And all I was saying then is that we can't approach the law, this law, or any law, simply on the basis of how old it is. And then I went on later on, and I said, and I'm quoting here again, as we carry out the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, we do so not selectively nor preferentially, but as they exist on the books. Whatever laws we have in the books, those are the laws that law enforcement officers and persons who take oaths of office like myself and others, cabinet and defense force personnel, police officers, those laws in the books are what they say that you observe the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. And I went on, and the quotation from the Guardian went on to say, quoting, it was neither about how old the law was, nor about its colonial origin like most of our laws are, but rather about what exactly the law meant to deal with and is dealing with. Now, I thought that that was simple and straightforward. And I thought I could have had that conversation with the population without it generating accusations. One, the Prime Minister is defending the Sedition Act. Two, the Prime Minister is an emperor and an arrogant, power-hungry leader who is threatening us with anti-colonial laws of slavery days. I thought we were better than that. And three, I thought that that opened the door and made it quite clear that my point was, it was not the age of the law, it was not where it came from in the colonial era, but most importantly, what exactly the law was meant to deal or is dealing with. Those are my exact words. And those are the words I want to focus on today. One, I have no defense to put up for the Sedition Act as is, because laws are always being amended in this country. In fact, the Sedition Act itself was amended not once, but repeatedly. So there's no case to be made that it should not be amended again. But let me come back to my point. What exactly is this law meant to deal with? Now, I've seen it said that this issue of a person being charged by the Sedition Act has something to do with the coming elections. What folly. And it is because of the elections, persons who think that their statements are troublesome to the government, they have a case to fight, to defend themselves and their statements. Well, let me put the population to rest comfortably on this. That the government that I lead, the people that I deal with in my government, and me personally, have absolutely no fear of anything that any of my political opponents have to say in Trinidad and Tobago. Because whatever they say, they're free to say it. And that freedom would be defended by me and this government. And secondly, if in saying it, they get themselves in trouble, that is a matter for them, the police and the director of public prosecution. So it is quite wrong to reach from there to place at my doorstep persons who may have used their freedom, the one that I know they have, unfettered freedom, to say whatever they want to say. But when they say it, if they get themselves in trouble with the police or the DPP, it has nothing to do with me and my government. And without fear of contradiction for all those persons who believe that any person who recently got himself in trouble with the DPP and the police had anything to do with the government, fear not. There's absolutely no truth in that. And as for the media, fighting a campaign against the Sedition Act to protect the media, let me just remind the media something. It is in this country that Jack Warner, fighting extradition, charged with all kinds of offenses, is operating a newspaper, attacking the government every Friday, accusing us of all manner of evil, and free to do so. And I'll tell you something else too that you may not know. He has put himself and his paper in such a way that if you are slandered by that newspaper, you have nothing to get. And if you don't believe me, go and ask your opposition leader. She has a judgment against the Sunshine. Ask her if she can collect it. That is how free the media is in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is how there is no fear of this government, of the media, that is happening in Trinidad and Tobago. And I may ask a question. This terrible Sedition Act that we all so fearful of now, how many persons in the media, in the history of that act, has been charged for sedition? This fear that the media is carrying on, this narrative of this fear of media freedom that Matt is carrying on about, how many persons in the media has even been threatened by it and have been charged? To the best of my knowledge, not one. That means we have press freedom in Trinidad and Tobago. And any person who is making an argument that Trinidad and Tobago does not have press freedom, you are misrepresenting our country. But let me go back to my point. What exactly is the law meant to deal with? It's meant to deal with a situation where it doesn't matter what happens in other people's country, because some persons have made a case that the law is old, and we must show our modern condition by getting rid of it to show that we are modern. Well, that might be so, but what exactly is this law meant to deal with? I was told, and I'm seeing, it was the slave master wanting to prevent the slave from being free. It was the king not wanting to be criticized, and so on and so on. These are all interesting conversations, but I don't think that's what it is. I don't think that's what it is. Trinidad and Tobago is a very diverse society, full of potential fault lines and fractures, whether it is ethnic, religious, racial, or otherwise. And it is for the protection of the groupings in Trinidad and Tobago, the groups of all time. We got to protect ourselves from those minorities, individuals as they might be, who may behave in such a way to allow those fault lines to become fractures. And that's where we should be looking. Not about freeing slaves and government want to protect itself from criticism. There's no such thing happening in Trinidad and Tobago. None whatsoever. And of course, in the parliament, when we pass laws, those of you who pay attention to the passage of laws in the parliament, you will see how many times parliamentarians, some of those who talking the loudest now on this issue, you will see how many times they would make the case for authority to be put in the hands of the Director of Public Prosecution. Independent office, the Director of Public Prosecution. Put the power in the hands of the Director of Public Prosecution. Don't give it to the minister. Don't give it to the ministry. Don't give it to the Director of Public Prosecution. And there are a number of all our criminal laws fall in that situation. And if that is so, why then, without a shred of evidence, are we telling ourselves that a situation where a citizen has been charged on the instruction of the Director of Public Prosecution, that is now a matter to be worn by the government of Trinidad and Tobago? You are not implying, you are stating a fact that the Director of Public Prosecution is a tool of the government of Trinidad and Tobago in the criminal prosecution of persons in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is not true. And you know it. And you should not do it. I have heard a senior counsel saying, well, it's the election season. And what this law permits is for the government to have persons who might be criticizing the government to be arrested or charged by the government. That is wholly irresponsible. Because the government of Trinidad and Tobago does not determine who is charged or arrested in this country. We all accept and we know it. You get charged, it's the police that charges you. And you know that the government does not direct the Commissioner of Police who to charge. And when they get a case against a citizen, they check it with the DPP. He looks at the evidence, and it is the DPP's instruction to charge or not charge that happens. So what is all this story now about somebody being charged and it's election time and therefore it is the government? We're not taking that. It is not true. And we must not portray our country like that, and these lies and these trumped up narratives about government being afraid of people who can't even fill a maxi taxi with supporters. And therefore, we have a law that we use against people. That is not our country. And let me tell you something. It's all well and good to carry on like this, to give some people a soapbox and a story to carry on with. But let me tell you something. What we ought to be looking at is whether it is acceptable, not the law, forget the law and its age, whether it is acceptable for a person from one group to take a position against another group, however he does it, and to cause harm or hurt to that group. Because it is because of that. Baka wasn't a politician when he was charged. Baka was a Muslim, talking about other Muslims when he was charged. And you know why he was charged? Because Muslims had complained to the police about what was said in a Friday prayers. Are you all aware of that? It was Muslim leaders in this country who had complained to the police about another Muslim leader. And on the basis of that, Baka was charged. He wasn't a politician. So let us not fool ourselves. A little girl had said something or posted something about the last Prime Minister. The little girl, what she called her name, her pen name was Granny Killer or something like that. Had said something, I can't remember the details of the story, but some girl from Cocorita, a teenager I think it was, had posted something which the Attorney General of the last government had found to be so offensive that he demanded of her publicly that she give herself up to the police. Attorney General of the last government, the Kamla Prasad government. The same Kamla Prasad who's telling you now she's coming to repeal the law. What is this law meant to deal with? I have seen religious text prepared by minority groups in Trinidad and Tobago so offensive to the Hindu community that I have said that if this is made public, it could cause serious rancor between our groups. And have rejected it out of hand that any person in this country could be so offending to put that into script, indicating who should or should not be in this country. I have heard and seen one individual saying that all Muslims should be killed and those who are not killed should be put in the desert in Saudi Arabia. And such person end up in the cabinet in Trinidad and Tobago. Is it okay for that to happen in our country? This country where every creed and race ought to find an equal place and we're full of creeds and we're full of races? Well, it might suit the Finns not to have it because they're all one people in Finland. But in Trinidad and Tobago, where out of many, this one nation, we have to be careful that we don't leave it open to individuals to behave in a particular way, which could have the result of destroying the harmony that we take for granted in Trinidad and Tobago. And that is my part in this conversation on this Sedition Act. If the act is to come up for review, like any other act, but for repeal, simply because somebody says so, the UNC has people they have underground, slandering people in the worst possible way, without recourse, on a daily basis. That is the freedom of speech that they want. That is the freedom of speech that they want. In this day and age where online you could harm people anonymously or otherwise, what we want is to ensure that we behave ourselves in a particular way where one section does not damage another section by its interpretation of its right of free speech. And let me draw your attention to something, because I know you like to believe it. It can't happen here. The hurricane in Bahamas can't happen here. And the earthquake in Haiti can't happen here, because God is a Trinity. Nice conversation. But I want to remind you all that a very terrible thing happened in Rwanda. Many of you never heard of Rwanda until there was genocide in Rwanda. And you know how that came about? It came about by people talking about other people. in a very disparaging way. That's how it started. We versus them, very disparaging way. And that reflected itself eventually in an interpretation when something happened to a leader in that country, an interpretation that they had attacked us and they don't belong in this country. And one radio announcer on a radio station made a call for people to take action against other citizens. And half of the nation took up cutlasses against the other half. Cutlasses, not even guns, cutlasses took up, machetes. And when it was all over 800,000 Rwandans had been killed. Maybe somebody could make a case to them about not having in their country the requirement to have laws to suppress that kind of excesses. Trinidad and Tobago, we are a very special and very different country. And we don't have to behave and do what other people do for themselves. We must do for ourselves in Trinidad and Tobago. And I do not appoint myself defender of the Sedition Act. I appoint myself as a citizen who knows that there's a place in this country for a law that restrains the excesses of negativity, as spelled out in some clauses in that law. And those who don't think so, don't know that. Many of them never even read the law. Many of them getting up and defending people that don't know what they're defending. Just fashionable. And many of them just straight malicious. And some of them see opportunity and they jump at it, hoping to take the rest of us. But we are not a nation led by a Pied Piper. We are serious people, and if the law has to be amended, then so be it. But please, members of the media, don't go off saying that I defending the Sedition Act. Because I wasn't doing that, and I'm not doing that. If it is to be amended, then let's make the case for an amendment. Let's see it. But on the other hand, let us not lose sight of the fact that we need. I've heard it said that we have the Terrorism Act, so therefore we don't need the provisions. Excuse me. That is one person's interpretation. Because, of course, if you look at what is described as terrorism, a lot of what is offensive, leading to bad behavior, can't properly be described as terrorism until, excuse me, until such time as something has happened. We want certain things not to happen. We want our children not to grow up in a society where I am free to abuse you and you're free to abuse me, because we all have freedoms. Because freedom without responsibility could be dangerous. How we use the freedom. In many countries where there's no Sedition Act, there's fulsome legislation on hate speech. And if you don't think that Trinidad and Tobago needs either hate speech restrictions or a Sedition Act with clauses to cover bad behavior, go on the UNC Facebook pages and see what goes on there. And you will know the extent of incipient hatred that exists in some people's bosom in Trinidad and Tobago. We have to determine what is acceptable for us and what is not acceptable, and not just simply talk about a law being old, so it's time to get rid of it. And that's the point I was making. With respect to, I told you a while ago, I think about a month ago, I told you that we have business in Washington and New York, diplomatic business, and I would be traveling in September. Next Wednesday, I travel with the Minister of National Security and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I've traveled to Washington on Wednesday. I have meetings on Thursday and Friday and come back on Saturday, and I come back on Sunday. And that takes care of our visit to Washington. When I'm there, I expect to meet with nationals in Washington on Friday night. And when I get back here, I'll be deep into the preparation of the budget with the Minister of Finance and the rest of the team. And then on the 22nd, at the start of the UN General Assembly. I return to New York, where I will take part fully in the proceedings. For the first time, I'll be going to the General Assembly, and that will take up that week. So that's the plan for now. If you have any questions, I prefer that I hope that I can answer a few of them. We have 10 minutes of questions, so yes, please.
Okay, I think we can understand your point about the need for any nation to manage its diversity, so whether it's hate, anti-hate laws, or sedition. But the thing with the sedition as a concern is it seems to be a clamp on, there's certain aspects of it, a clamp on generally saying anything that could cause any upset or any discontent within the population that may not be necessarily aimed at ethnic divisiveness, but just a general thing. So I think that from the free speech point of view, we'd have some concern about that.
I have no doubt. I mean, and I'm sure that if I go to the law books and pull up 25 laws, you can find concerns about 24. I have no concerns, no problem with that. If it is, but you must remember we were dealing with a specific thing, which immediately became repeal, which became too all. And I'm simply saying there's a reason to have that law in the books, or either in its current form or its amended form. And I'm certainly saying if we are going to repeal it, it has to be replaced with something, because we have to have legislation in this country that will govern the behavior of those who would use their bad behavior to destroy the fabric of our society. That much I know.
Prime Minister, good afternoon. Just following up on Sean's question, I think one of the other concerns expressed by probably the same senior counsel you referred to would have been the low threshold of the law and it being so broad. He did compare.
It is the same law that has been there. It was not broadened in the last week or the last month. This law has been there for quite some time. The broadening and the interpretations are of recent vintage. Because if it is so threatening to us, you tell me. You tell me before this last person was charged with it, where all these threats were. When Baka was arrested with the same breadth of law, when Seals was arrested, a police officer arrested, it was the same breadth of law. What is happening here, and what you members of the media are giving a pass to? Last week, the problem that the opposition leader had was trying to explain and deal with putting a man on a platform to lie on the Prime Minister, to damage school children in this country. Right? Up to now, the opposition leader has not made a single comment on that serious infraction that she gave life to, the latest of her misconduct. I have not heard a word from Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar about the disgraceful behavior and exposure of former officer Denny. So she and her cohorts were quite happy to jump on this sedition matter, hoping to distract the population from that issue. That issue, which requires a response from her. I understand she's coming to the parliament to amend the law. She didn't do that when Anand Ramlogan was the Attorney General with the same breadth of law, when the little girl from Kukurit was asked to give up yourself to the police because you have made certain comments about the Prime Minister, which is unacceptable. See the hypocrisy? And everybody behind, the Prime Minister defending Sedition Act. I'm defending nothing. I'm simply making a point that when I got this job, I took an oath of office to uphold the law and the Constitution. And until the law has been changed, I am duty-bound. And so is the police officer. And I made a point in the speech. I said, we should not apply it preferentially. Meaning that it applies to all of us. So all this interpretation, including the one that election come in and therefore this law could be used for election. Let me just remind you all something in case you all don't know. We have the PNM. Our record in this country is not that. And those who want to paint us in that way, we reject it. We have serve this country in government. We've lost elections. We go in the opposition. We stay in the opposition for the period of time. We come back on election day, and we have never used any law like this or anything like that. We never bring Cambridge Analytica here to violate your freedom, to feed you lies as truth, to interfere with government and take taxpayers' money and pay millions of dollars to make you vote stupidly thinking you're voting smart. We never did that, not the PNM. So all these interpretations, all I'm saying is that these interpretations, most of them are convenience. And when I hear somebody who tells me that's senior counsel, and he is concerned about the government using this in the coming election, I simply say, there you have it. We have no involvement in the charging of anybody. I saw some UNC personnel saying the UNC didn't use the law to charge anybody. That is nonsense. The UNC government, like the PNM government, as a government, we have no power to charge anybody in this country. It is the police that charges anybody. So to come and try to make yourself look good by saying the UNC didn't charge anybody, what does that mean? Are you giving the impression that you had the power as a government to charge somebody with a criminal act and you chose not to do it because you're nice? But you're going further and saying that somebody's charged in 2019 and it is because the DPP is carrying out the government's instructions. I've seen that being said in this country. And it ought not to be said that way. It is not true. We should be proud of the fact that we have an independent Office of Director of Public Prosecution who is not in the hands or pocket of any politician or any government, but there by the Constitution to provide protection for every citizen. Independent power to commence or to end prosecution. That is what's going to strengthen us in this country. Not to badmouth the DPP office and to lie about it and say the office of DPP is involved in taking instructions from the government because some imp go and say something that attract the attention of the police and the police determine that the law applies to you. That's what's happening in this country. All of a sudden the law is applying to somebody, and some people in this country, give them half a chance, want to take the position that the law doesn't apply to them. They're above the law. That is a matter for them, the police, and the Director of Public Prosecution, not for the government or for the PNM.
The law remains unchanged, whereas you're saying that the PNM would not have used this law maliciously in the past. The opportunity... No,
I'm not saying that. The facts and the history of this country is saying that.
But the opportunity could still be there for future governments to misuse, if I may, the law. Are you open to any public discussion on this particular?
There is a public discussion taking place. There is a public discussion. The public discussion is, one, the law too old. Two, the law must be repealed. Three, I'm part of the public discussion. I'm saying that let us also pay attention to what the law is meant to deal with. And I've also said that if the law has to be amended, well, laws are amended all the time. So we shouldn't be exercised in this way. And all this lying finger pointing is not helping us. It might help 2 or 3 struggling political parties to have a chance to think. Because we are misrepresenting our country. Why are we telling the world that in Trinidad and Tobago, the Director of Public Prosecution is under the thumb of the government and could prosecute people politically? Why are we doing that? It's a lie.
So when you say laws are amended all the time, does that mean that you are open to overseas?
I'm always open. I'm always open because I'm the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and I lead the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And if there is a case to be made, then let's make it in a civil way. We don't have to lie about it.
So your government is prepared to engage in a debate on this sedition?
No, the government is prepared. The government is prepared to defend itself from accusations that are not true. That's what the government is going to do.
Yeah, but apart from the current issues, the basic things of laws over time, we're not the 1920s.
Are you aware that there's a law reform commission in this country? Are you aware of that? What is the purpose of the Law Reform Commission?
No, but it has to be driven. You guys have to give the instructions. So.
Really?
Yeah, well,
really?
You should have some
Really? The Law Reform Commission, right, is a body that is charged with the responsibility of reviewing the laws. Now that you have this conversation, what do you think would be the reaction of the Law Reform Commission to this conversation that's taking place in the country? Clearly, there's a conversation that has come up because of certain developments which would say that this is a law that maybe we should look at. There's a Law Reform Commission. Or if the government on its own thinks that this is urgent and requires urgent action, then the Attorney General's office can look at it. There's a pathway by which law goes to the Parliament. If it's happening, we're busy defending ourselves from the lies. Right? That's what we're doing right now. We're busy in the government defending ourselves from the misrepresentation that the government is using the Sedition Act politically in Trinidad and Tobago. Right?
So as we stand here, there is no action or decision to look at the law.
As I stand here now, I know of nothing in the pipeline directed at the Sedition Act. What I do know is that there's a strong conversation about this law from one side of the pendulum to the other. And all I'm saying, we could approach this in a civil way without all the pseudo-intellectual misrepresentation and the mischief and the lies and the accusations. That's all I'm saying.
Concerning the soldiers who are to be sent to the back.
Thank you very much.
Well, could we just follow up before?
No, we finished with that. No.
By civil way.
I told you. Not fabricating lies to make the government, on the government's actions. The government is not involved in persecuting or prosecuting anybody under the Sedition Act or any other act for that matter. The government observes the structures in the country where the treatment of behavior of citizens is in the hands of the Commissioner of Police and his charges and the Director of Public Prosecution where criminality is concerned. Right? And the third limb of that stool is that persons in office, holding office, have to observe the laws as they exist on that day. And if there are to be changes to the law in days in the future, there are procedures for doing it.
I find it just very non-committal. I mean, 1 minute you're saying laws are amended all the time, and yes, there is a civil way to do it, and then you're backtracking and throwing up all this stuff that's currently before us.
Well, you could find what you want. I notice you're not finding me saying that there is a basis on which a law like this is on the books. And as we talk about amending or repealing it, we should not lose sight of the fact that there is a basis on which this law is there. I find you have no interest in that.
No, we understand the managing diversity part, but there are some serious freedom of expression, freedom of media implications from at least 2 or 3 of
I have just pointed out to you how that fear is contrived. I just told you. I mean, you think, let me ask you one question. You think that our freedom in Trinidad and Tobago is so restricted that persons could own and operate a newspaper, and that newspaper is operating without let or hindrance and possibly in breach of the laws of the country. And we are going along merrily with it. It hasn't disturbed anybody in this country. This is a free country. We have freedom of speech in this country. And I ask you, this dangerous law is on the books to be abused by the politicians as you make it. How many press persons have been subject to it? I'm simply, what's the record? What's the record?
I mean, there are some very bad, it's not really satisfactory to have bad laws in place, even if they are not enforced, such as the gay community.
Listen. There are some people, there are points of view. There are some people who believe that the law on capital punishment is bad law. Haven't you heard that before? So the fact that you saying it's bad law doesn't mean that it should be taken off the books. There are people who believe that there should not be a law that allows capital punishment. But of course, the population thinks otherwise. So there's no restriction on your freedom to think so or to say so. One more question on this matter. Anthony, one question on this subject. Hold on one second. You were saying about Bahamas.
I just want to find out exactly when the personnel will be sent went out to the Bahamas to send aid?
The National Security Minister will address that as we go forward because it involves logistical arrangements and but preparation work is going on to be able to do that, and we want to do it as quickly as possible. But it's a logistical thing. Even if they're ready now, they can't go because you can't get in there by air or by sea. So we are putting ourselves in a position to get there when you're allowed to get in, but as quickly as possible. So I would say roughly in the next few days. And yes, Anthony.
So I want to ask you about the status of the HDC contract with the Chinese contracting firm.
Oh, good question. Actually, I meant to raise that. That contract has been, it was reviewed extensively by the cabinet, and it has been stopped, and HDC has been instructed to go back out to tender because there were some parts of that contract which did not meet the cabinet's acceptance and approval. They were, structurally and legalistically. So that project is, that contract has been stopped.
When you say stop, what do you mean?
We're not going forward with it in the way it was, in the form in which it was produced. Cancelled, yes. Yeah. Because
So the 500, the $500,000 US, where is that coming from to send to the Bahamas?
it's coming from it's coming from the accounts of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Which account I couldn't say. The Minister of Finance will probably answer you that. But it's going to come from the accounts of the government of Trinidad and Tobago.
And we have that to assist the Bahamas?
Well, if there wasn't a storm in the Bahamas, and if the people of the Bahamas were not in the dire strait that they were in, we in Trinidad and Tobago would have had use for that money. But because we are required to be our brother's keeper, maybe we'll eat one banana less and let them have it. Okay?
So there's a CARICOM contingent, I understand, in the Bahamas. Have you been apprised yet of the situation?
When you say a CARICOM contingent, what do you mean?
I think Mr. LaRock, Mia Motley as well.
That's what I just said. Some of my CARICOM colleagues have gone on to the Bahamas. Mr. LaRock is the Secretary General of CARICOM, operating out of Guyana. And we are doing all kinds of things. Some people have gone there. Those from the Northern Caribbean, I don't know if the Jamaican Prime Minister has gone, but the Barbados Prime Minister and I think St. Lucia. And so people will do different things. Here in Trinidad and Tobago, we are making sure that what we do is what we think is best under the circumstances. Thank you very much.
And that was live coverage of the weekly post-cabinet media briefing on TTT, Talk City 91.1 FM and on TTT Live Online on Facebook. Remember, we'll have more on matters coming out of today's briefing in our major newscasts. I'm Mahalia Joseph Wharton. Have a good afternoon.